upon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to be sharing some interesting ideas about the teaching of language, about the teaching of English as a second language or as a foreign language. And in particular, I'll be focusing on what we can do as a teacher to help our students develop a higher level of proficiency in the language that they are studying. But first off, before I share my thoughts with you, let me just say it again. My university is a very good university, a vibrant university located in Singapore. It's called Nanyang Technological University. And I belong to the School of Education, and locally it's called the National Institute of Education, one and the only one in Singapore. And we have a range of courses. I would like to invite you to come and consider our School of Education for your graduate studies. If you are from Indonesia, I think you can apply for the prestigious LPDP scholarship. And if you're successful, then you may want to consider coming to study with us at the university. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start off with a quiz. If you have been teaching for many, many years, I'm sure just you like me have been asking this one big question. And this is one big question that I've been asking for many, many years. And today, I think I know the answer. What is the best way to teach a second language? I've been trying to find the answer, and I think I've now found the answer. Now, here is one answer. I'd like to quote, to share with you a quote from a book, Teaching Readers of English. And the quote actually is very, very relevant for our discussion today. And this is what they say in the quote. I'm going to read this very carefully so that we can share the same enthusiasm and passion with me about this one teaching approach, which has been said to be universally hailed as beneficial. The keyword here is beneficial and universally beneficial. So it's everywhere, globally, important and necessary, and yet it is so underutilized and even ignored. And what is the name of that approach? Josefa, please say extensive reading.
Extensive reading.
Very good. Listening. Yes, that's the answer. Extensive reading. And because today's topic is on extensive reading and listening, I think we have to mention both, yeah, extensive reading and listening. And later I'll share with you why both extensive reading and listening. If you're looking for other people who share the same views, now these are some of the people that I know very well. The first one is the lady who is moderating my session today. The second lady is also a very well-known person in Japan, and she's been doing a lot of good things, encouraging teachers to implement extensive reading in their teaching. The two gentlemen there, they've done a lot of work, and their work has been a big inspiration to me, especially when they say that extensive reading is very, very good for you, for the students, and for any other people who are interested in learning, in developing proficiency in a new language that they are studying or they are learning. I have to mention this young man, this good-looking young man. I think the name is Rob Waring, and he happens to be here today with us. He will also be telling you a lot of things about extensive reading later on, yeah?
Looking a bit older now.
So you'll be listening to a lot of things, a lot of ideas about extensive reading from me and also from Rob Waring. But the key thing to remember is this. This is the most important takeaway of today's session. Extensive reading and listening is good for you, teachers. It's also good for your students. Extensive reading is probably the best way to help our students to acquire, to extend, and to also maintain their language proficiency over time. Essentially, there are two things that I want to share with you. Number one is the what and why of extensive reading and listening, the theory and the research that supports it. And point number two, I want to share with you some potential applications of extensive reading and listening in our teaching, in your teaching. And after that, discussions, questions, and answers from you, which Rob and I will be addressing at the very end of today's presentation or today's session. Let's begin the first one, the theory and the research, the what and the why of extensive reading and listening. Let's begin with the what first. What is extensive reading and listening? I'm going to describe extensive reading and listening in a way that is different from what we normally understand when we teach reading and listening in the classroom. Yeah. Here's the first point. Extensive reading and listening is reading and listening for pleasure, reading and listening for recreation. This is often not the kind of things that we do in our typical listening lessons or reading lessons. So the key word to remember is something that is pleasurable, something that is recreational is good for your students. And number two, when the students do read and listen, they're doing it for, just to get the general ideas about what, the text is about. Very big, very broad ideas. If they want to, they can try to remember some of the details, but they don't have to. So this is not very much like what normally happens in the classroom, where the students, after they listen to a very short text, after they read a short text, they need to spend a lot of time trying to understand, to read, to find out every single details in the text that they're listening to or they're reading. And finally, another important point, pleasure reading, recreational reading and listening, extensive reading and listening is not for study purposes. But surprisingly, students who read a great deal, students who listen a great deal, will never be advantaged when it comes to examinations, when it comes to, us assessing their English language proficiency. So there's an important, positive side effect of doing a lot of recreational reading and also pleasure reading and listening. A few more things about extensive reading and listening in terms of the text, in terms of the content of the text, of the listening text and the reading text. Point number one, very important to remember, the text materials, the reading materials, the listening materials will have to be very interesting, will have to be compelling. The kind of things that you want to, that happens when you read the first line or the second line or the first paragraph of a reading passage and you want to continue until you get to the end. So that is the kind of things that I have in mind when I say compelling, interesting, very, very exciting stuff. Number two, content is important, but the second consideration is that the language, the text, the grammar, the vocabulary will have to be accessible. It has to be at the student's level. Slightly above the student's level is okay, slightly, but not too much. A little below the student's level is also okay, especially when you work with students who have very little experience in listening, in understanding the language. That is perfectly okay. And number three, another important point. Unlike the typical reading and listening lessons that we do in the classroom, extensive reading and listening is very, very student-centered. We want to empower the students to make choices. We want to give them the flexibility and the freedom to choose what they want to read and listen. And if that happens, we can expect our students to read more and to listen more. And eventually, we'll be able to see our students reading and listening in massive quantity. The research is very clear when the students do a great deal of listening and reading. I think chances are very high that they will be able to develop a higher level of proficiency in the language. Let me just continue a little bit. This is one quote that I've seen in the professional literature. I can't remember the name of the book. What the researchers say is this, that language input through listening and reading is the sine qua non of language learning. Sine qua non means is a prerequisite, it's a precondition. Without sufficient input, I don't think the students will be able to, improve on their language proficiency. And this input usually comes in the form of reading and listening. In other words, we can acquire language from reading and we can also acquire language from listening. And if we do both listening and reading on a regular basis, I think chances are higher that we'll be able to develop, a higher proficiency, overall proficiency in the language. Let me take it one step further. and look at what exactly students get from doing a lot of reading and listening. There are three major benefits. The first one, obviously, is a linguistic benefit, language learning benefits that you get from doing a lot of reading and listening. As you can guess, doing a lot of reading and listening will help students improve their word knowledge, their vocabulary knowledge. Again, research is very clear that word knowledge is one of the most important predictors of one's ability to speak, to write, and to understand the language. Without sufficient vocabulary, it's very difficult for you to read, understand, and use language for communicative purposes. Your grammar also tends to increase as well. Now, this is a special kind of grammar that your students will be able to develop over time. This is known as implicit grammar. I have a lot more to say about the implicit grammar of the language a bit later on. Another important benefit is this cognitive benefits. Students' knowledge of the world is likely to increase a great deal after they have spent 1 year, for example, reading a variety of texts, on a variety of topics. Their knowledge about places, their knowledge about history, their knowledge about travels, their knowledge about many other things. And again, we know from research that knowledge is important for comprehension purposes. It is not possible for you to understand a piece of text written in a specific context unless you know the context, unless you know the topic very well. Yeah. And these two combinations, word and world knowledge, will help our students in thinking about their reading and listening, and also in responding to important comprehension questions that teachers usually ask. And finally, remember, extensive reading and listening is about having pleasure, having a lot of enjoyment, having a lot of fun. So not surprisingly, the last benefit has to do with the feeling, the motivation, the will, the determination, and the excitement of learning. So we can expect all these three major benefits if you do a good job providing students with the right kind of materials. And if you are doing a good job motivating your students in doing this, I think chances are very high that the students will be able to, to enjoy all these wonderful benefits that are very important in language learning. In other words, after a period of time, we can expect our students to develop their fluency in comprehension. And this fluency very easily will lead to improvement in students' ability to comprehend, to understand information that is presented in speaking and also in writing. Maybe, all these benefits are from the professional literature, from people like Rob and me, and from other experts in applied linguistics or in English language teaching areas. But if you ask people, people who have had real experience in writing and reading, like this person, a novelist who has written a lot of best-selling novels, this is what she says about the benefits of reading. And I'm going to read to you this very, very nice quote: read 1,000 books. Is she exaggerating when she says read 1,000 books? I don't think so. 1,000 books is almost nothing if you are willing to spend the time doing it, not in one day, but maybe over a period of time. Read 1,000 books and your words will flow like a river. Now, this person does not use the word fluency or any other fancy words associated with language learning, but this person uses a very easy word like flow. Now, flow means fluency, yeah? Your ability to use language effortlessly, and that is what flow is all about. Extremely important concept in language learning. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to increased fluency and comprehension, are there any other bonuses? Yes. Now, here is a bonus. Again, this is something that I've experienced myself, and I've seen from the professional literature, and also from my conversations with a lot of teachers, in the region and in some other places. Students who have become fluent readers after doing a lot of reading and listening, they're more likely to develop a higher writing skills. In the same way, students who have done a lot of listening are very, very likely to become better, more sophisticated speakers as well. It is from listening. it is from doing regular listening that you develop the ability to pronounce words clearly and accurately and, with flair, if you like. Yeah, so there's a lot of benefits associated with extensive reading and extensive listening. At this point, let me share with you a quote from one of the big guys here in language education, Stephen Krashen. Yeah, clearly he mentions the connection between reading and writing. Now, this is what he says. When enough reading is done, let me say that one more time. When enough reading is done, enough reading doesn't mean reading one whole week. That's not enough, yeah? That means reading a lot of materials over a period of time. When enough reading is done, all the necessary grammatical structures and discourse rules for writing will automatically be presented to the writer in sufficient quantity. I think this is something that we all need to remember. If you want to help your students to write better, to write well, I think the very first step you need to do is to provide students with enough reading. What about the connection between speaking and listening? I'm going to follow exactly what Krashen says, and I will exactly copy what he said and turn what he said into something like this. When enough listening is done, I think the same thing is likely to happen because the listeners will have heard a lot of grammatical structures, discourse rules, and other language rules. And gradually, eventually, they'll be able to make use of these rules, these conventions, when they try to express themselves orally in speaking. Getting a bit more complicated now, but not very complicated. Now, this is a very, very simple representation or simple model of how language learning happens from input to all the way to output, from listening and reading all the way to students being able to produce the language for speaking and writing. Let's begin with the last one here. Our job, one of our most important jobs is to help our students to become more capable in expressing themselves orally and in writing. We want them to become good users of the language. In order for that to happen, I think from our discussion today, we know that input is a sine qua non of language acquisition. So whether you like it or not, they have to do this. They have to do sufficient, enough, or Rob will use the word massive. They have to do massive listening and reading over a period of time. But not any kind of reading, not all reading or listening will be useful. Now, this is the kind of reading and listening that is easy, that is pleasurable, that is enjoyable, and that is available on a regular basis, frequency, daily, weekly basis, and also in large quantity. If that happens, I'm very sure that students will acquire the linguistic system of the new language that they are learning. Now, the big question for us is this: what does it look like when you say that they have acquired the linguistic system? What does it look like? Does it look like this? The system that you have in your head that allows you to produce language spontaneously, effortlessly, fluently, accurately, and things like that. Does it comprise hundreds and hundreds of grammar and discourse rules? Yusufa, please answer. Please say no.
No, but we
Very good. That's a very good answer. Yes, no. The answer is yes. There may be a few grammar rules or discourse rules that you learn explicitly, from your teachers. But the majority of these grammar and discourse rules are not explicit. They are very, very implicit. Now, here is another quote for you that I want to share with you. It's a very important quote from two second language acquisition researchers. Yeah, just pay attention to the bolded text. The system that we have in our head as a result of doing a lot of listening and reading over a period of time, number one, is very complex. Can you describe this complex system? Yes, a little bit. Very, very little. What about the grammar books that provide you with like hundreds and hundreds of grammar rules? That is just barely the scratching the surface of this complex grammatical system that we have in our head that enables us to use the language for real communication. Point number 2 is that this system is implicit, largely implicit, largely intuitive. When you are able to say that, hey, this sentence doesn't sound right, you are making use of that implicit language. Of course, occasionally as a language teacher, you are able to put your fingers on okay, there's a subject-verb agreement problem, there's a noun clause problem, probably you can say that, yeah. But for real purposes of language learning and language using, I don't think there is a need for the students to acquire a lot of explicit linguistic knowledge or grammar knowledge of the language. And what are the sources of this complex, abstract, and implicit system? Is the language input. So that's why I mentioned early on that this input is a sine qua non of language learning, of language acquisition. Now here is another quote. This one is easier to understand, yeah? And hopefully you will remember this. I have memorized this line, so every time I am giving a presentation, I will cite this quote. It's a very nice quote. And nobody disagrees, actually. Nobody who have had a lot of experience teaching and are familiar with the professional literature will agree with this statement. I mean, read this very carefully. The ability to produce language, to speak and to write. That is to produce language relatively easily. That means fluently, accurately, and also effortlessly, for communicative purposes, not for exam purposes. Remember this, not for exam purposes, draws heavily on implicit knowledge, not on explicit knowledge. I'm not saying explicit knowledge is not important. It is, but the role it plays in language learning is not as much as we believe it does. Let me share with you a case study, a very, very interesting case study that was done some years back. Now, the case study examines what some of the most successful English language learners in China did before they became very good users of the language. So we are looking at those kids, high school students who are very good, who are winners of national English language competition. So these people are really, really very good, because in China, we are talking about millions of people out there. So if you win, at the national level, then you must have been able to compete with, thousands and thousands of other competitors. And when they were interviewed, they said this very clearly. I spent many hours doing what? Doing grammar exercises? Yes, Eva, please say no. Doing grammar exercises? No. Doing a lot of grammar drills? No. Listening to teachers' explanation of the grammar rules? Please say no. They do, but they're not really understanding the explanation of the teachers. This is what they did. They listen again and again and again. So listening again, reading again is what what extensive reading and extensive listening is all about. Now, here are some quotes from the students who were interviewed by the researcher. This is what they say. I think you will also have experienced this, at the early, phase of your language learning experience. I was slow in the beginning and I had to listen to it many more times. Surprise, surprise, no surprise. That's what usually happens. And I gradually developed some feel for the language. Remember the word feel here? Intuition, implicit knowledge. That is what it is all about. Yeah. Of course, this student doesn't know the word implicit knowledge of the language. That term is, the kind of term that people in academia uses. I feel that I just have countless patterns sort of swimming around in my head. Patterns. Lines from movies often naturally pop out. Again, questions. What are these patterns? Grammar, vocabulary, or both? Ajahn Ming, grammar, vocabulary, or both? Please say both.
Both.
Yes, both grammar and vocabulary together. Ladies and gentlemen, we often do things separately. We teach grammar separately. We teach vocabulary separately. but the research is telling us very clearly that if you want your students to be able to use language for real communicative purposes, then I think we need to teach them both together, and we need to get the students to experience, to be exposed to a lot of examples of how these patterns are encountered in their reading and in their listening. In the professional literature, now these patterns are referred to as lexical chunks, lexical bundles, or fixed expressions, or idioms sometimes. Now here are some examples of these idioms or fixed expressions or lexical bundles. Make do with it. Another example, I'm so sorry, let me make it up to you next time. You can make fun of me all you want, but wait until I get back to you with revenge. The good news made my day. Please make up my mind. Now, I'm going to ask Yusefa here some questions. Yusefa, how about this? Can you say make your homework? Please say no.
No.
No, you can't say that. Is there any reason why we can't say make your homework? Unfortunately, there's no reason. We can only use our intuition to say that doesn't sound right. People usually say, do your homework, right? Yes, do your homework. Another example, do the bed. Yusefa, can you say do the bed? No, you can't. You have to say make the bed, right? Can you say make the dishes? No, you can't. You have to say do the dishes. Why? There's no reason. English is very strange. There's no reason. You simply have to acquire the whole string of words, the whole patterns, just like that. Here's another one. COVID time. Have you been in near contact or in close contact with people who tested positive? Interestingly, people don't say near contact. It's not wrong. I think we understand the meaning of near contact, but the fixed expression, the combination, the word combination is usually in close contact with other people. Now, here are some other examples here that I have here on my screen. Yeah, this one is on me. It was lovely to see you. And there are hundreds, thousands and thousands of these expressions that we use on a regular basis in speaking, in casual conversations. In the same way, in written language, we get to see patterns that keep appearing again and again and again. And these are known as lexical bundles or lexical chunks. And these are things that we acquire quite naturally when we are doing a lot of reading and listening. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share with you some of the people that I've seen, that I've met, who have developed a very high level of proficiency in the language by doing a lot of reading and doing a lot of listening. Yeah, some of these kids, wonderful, wonderful kids. Yeah, they develop a very high level of proficiency, including this teacher from Indonesia. She enjoyed watching a lot of movies when she was younger. Even now, she watches a lot of movies, and also this teacher as well from Indonesia. Both speak English very, very fluently and very, very well. I would like to share a quote from this teacher from Vietnam, whom I met a few years ago, and I still remember what she said to me when I talked to her, when I interviewed her, when I asked her, how come your English was so good? And she said very clearly, because I did a lot of reading. What's the big deal about doing a lot of reading? And this is what she said. Wow, this is really, really, really very impressive to me. Reading makes reading easier, and reading makes writing easier as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I have about 5 minutes to share with you some classroom applications. First off, if you're doing a lot of teaching, if you're teaching language, then the first thing you need to do when you teach reading and listening is to increase the amount of reading and listening in the classroom. And if possible, hopefully also outside the classroom. Time spent on reading, time spent on listening. Remember what I said earlier on. The quantity of reading and listening, or the quantity of language input, is what enables students eventually to build this linguistic system, this complex linguistic system, this implicit linguistic system, which later allows them to produce a language for communicative purposes. If you do that, then you'll have to reduce the other activities that you normally do in the classroom. Yeah, other activities may be very interesting, may be very motivating, but I think you need to reduce the amount of these activities and give students a lot more opportunities to do a lot more listening and reading in the classroom and outside the classroom. Here is my favorite quiz. Look at these two pictures, Josefa, picture number 1 or picture number 2. In which of the two classes students are likely to do a lot more reading? First picture or the second picture? In the first picture, the students are doing a lot of exercises there, reading exercises. In the second picture, I think you can tell very immediately. Which one? Picture number 1 or number 2? Please say number 2.
Number 2.
Yes, picture number 2. The kids are actually doing a lot of reading, and that is a very good thing. And I would like to see a lot more teachers, giving students a lot more opportunities to do a lot more reading and listening. Point number 2, ladies and gentlemen, please remember this. Yeah, it is okay for you to use slightly difficult or sometimes challenging materials, sometimes, but most of the time, I think you should be using this easier and more enjoyable reading and listening materials. When students do this, they are more likely to do more reading and more listening, either inside or outside the classroom. Think about tasks that promote more listening and more reading, both in class and outside the classroom. So in addition to your usual comprehension questions, I think you need to think about other tasks and other enjoyable activities that will get students to be more excited about continuing their reading after the class is finished. Yeah. In other words, we want our students to be doing a lot of this and not just doing a lot of drills, a lot of exercises, a lot of practice. Remember what I said earlier on, listening and reading are the best source of language development. Next one. I think if you've been teaching for a while and if you've been using course books on reading and listening, you will have seen that these course books contain a lot of suggestions that we should be teaching a lot of listening strategies and reading strategies. My advice, my take on this, reading strategies, listening strategies are fine, but don't bet your life on them. They can be very useful, but yes, the course, the source of students' development in proficiency is not learning strategies, but actually doing a lot more reading and a lot more listening. Yeah, especially not for lower proficiency students. One thing that I would like to suggest to you is this, some ideas like repeated reading and listening is very good. Reading while listening is also very good. And shadowing is also very good. If you're looking for some reference, this is a scholar from Japan, and he has written a lot about shadowing, which is an excellent, excellent way of improving one's language proficiency through doing a lot of listening and also through doing a lot of reading. And finally, very important, what is the role of the teacher? I think the role of the teacher is to be a model, to be a motivator. When you come to class, make sure that you bring a book and show your students that you are an enthusiastic reader and that you find reading really enjoyable to do. Yeah, now these are some questions that I've often heard. Well, my students don't like to read. That is actually not very true. What happens is often that students have not found the books that they really, really want to read. Now, here is a real life story. Now, this guy, when he was younger, he didn't enjoy reading at all. Until one day, his teacher walks into the classroom and shows him a book and starts reading that book to him. And he became like, wow, this is something that is very exciting. Now, these are the books that he enjoyed reading. So the moment he found the book that he wanted to read, he started reading all the titles in the series. And that's the guy who wrote the author of these books, Paul Jennings, an Australian writer. So ask your students. So do not judge your students because they may not be reading because they don't like reading, but find out what they really, really want to read. A colleague of mine did a big survey in Singapore, and this is what she found. Some of the titles that students really want to read, but unfortunately, many of these books are very often not available in the school library. Final observations. Yes, extensive reading and listening is good, but it's not easy. That's what I often hear people say. They will say that, well, I don't have a lot of books available. I don't have time. Does it really work? And there are a lot more concerns that teachers might have about extensive reading and listening, in particular when it comes to materials. The truth of the matter today is that materials are widely accessible and available. If you just go to the internet and look at the books that are available in this website, the Asia Foundation, you'll be able to find a lot of free reading materials for your students to read online, or they can even download and get it printed as well. Here is another one, freely available on the internet. The problem is that the stories may be a little bit too challenging for the majority of our students. And because of that, I would recommend, if you have the resources, for you to sign up for this digital library of graded readers. It's called X Reading, and this is the guy who developed the digital library. It has a lot of graded reading materials, and your students, if they sign up, they can listen and read anytime, anywhere. Remember, reading and listening can be done together. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I've now come to the end of my presentation. I've shared with you some of the most important theory and research behind extensive reading and listening and their associated benefits. And I've also shared with you some potential applications. Again, the key takeaway for you, if extensive reading and listening is good for you and your students, shouldn't we all be doing it? Free gifts for you for listening very attentively to my presentation. You can scan the QR code or just type my name in Google, and you'll be able to find a lot of resources available for free. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.